It is Monday evening, the 1st of February 2016, and a quiet night in the Akobo area of Ibadan. Ibadan is a city in the southwestern region of Nigeria, and Akobo is an upper-class area of town. In Akobo, you find big houses, hotels, and well-constructed roads which give access to other prime locations in the city, such as the University of Ibadan, Ibadan Airport, and the University College Hospital. Banks Estate is located in a rapidly developing residential area of Akobo and tucked away on a quiet street off the main road. One of the buildings in the estate belongs to Mr. Badmus and his wife, Mrs. Badmus. The building has 2 flats. Mr. Badmus and Mrs. Badmus live in the lower flat and they rent out the upper flat to a couple. That evening, Mr. and Mrs. Badmus are getting ready to retire for the night, and as part of their evening routine, they sit together to say their nightly prayers. A muffled sound starts to creep into the room. It sounds like shouting from the apartment above. Mrs. Badmus closes her eyes and tries to concentrate on her prayers, raising her own voice to drown out the sounds. But the shouting gets louder. Then suddenly, there's a loud bang. Her eyes fly open and she sees the ceiling fan above their table shake. The loud bang is followed by screams and yells. Mr. Badmus cuts his prayer short and runs out. Mrs. Badmus follows behind and together they run upstairs. Mr. Badmus reaches the top of the stairs first and he begins to bang on the door.
Open this door! Jide, open this door! What is going on there?
Seconds later, the door flies open and on the other side is a man clutching his left shoulder. Mr. Badmus could see blood stains on the man's white singlet and boxer shorts, and his right hand was completely covered with blood.
She stabbed me!
I am so tired of this man.
She stabbed me!
Oh shit.
Officer, I didn't kill my husband.
But Yamin is dead.
I love my husband.
Nothing in life is certain except death, taxes, and crime. Criminals exist in every community. They can be a complete stranger, a next-door neighbor, or the person you kiss goodnight. Welcome to the 3rd season of True Crime Naija. I'm your host, John E03. In this series, we bring you stories of crimes that have actually happened not only in Nigeria but across Africa. We hope that by sharing these stories, we all become a little smarter at detecting and preventing similar crimes.
Mrs. Badmus moves past her husband and reaches for Jide's shoulder to examine his wound. She is a retired nurse from the University College Hospital in Ibadan.
And do you have a first aid box? Please bring it.
She guides Jide to the sofa in the middle of the sitting room, sits him down and positions his arm on the armrest. Mr. Badmus starts to walk into the apartment and towards the sofa. That's when he notices a woman near the door leading to the bedroom. It's Funke, Jide's wife. Funke enters the bedroom and returns with a first aid kit.
What happened, Jide? She attacked me while I was sleeping. We were only having a conversation about my trip to Europe for business. And I said I was planning to stop by to see Rachel and my son. The next thing I knew, I just felt it in my chest. The scissors.
As Mrs. Badmus is helping Jide, Mr. Badmus approaches Funke.
Scissors. Why? What is the meaning of this?
Daddy, I've told him to keep that woman and her child away from me and my family, but he won't listen. Every time she calls him, asking to see him. Now I can't even complain about it.
I'm still his father. And he's still my son, for crying out loud. Nothing is happening between me and Rachel. And Funke knows about this.
Daddy, he attacked me, oh. He attacked me first.
Like this?
I was just trying to defend myself. Yes, he attacked. He was the one.
I never even touched her. I never touched her. She attacked me with the scissors and I had to defend myself.
Daddy, he pinned me to the floor. I was trying to get away from him and then I just grabbed whatever I could find. I didn't know it was scissors. It happened so fast.
You almost killed him.
Mr. Badmus and Mrs. Badmus couldn't believe what they were hearing. By now, Mrs. Badmus has managed to slow the bleeding down, but the wound on Jide's shoulder is deep and she knows that he needs stitches. Mrs. Badmus tells her husband that they need to get Jide to the hospital. They all go downstairs to the car park and Mr. Badmus drives them to a hospital 2 streets away from their estate. On their way to the hospital, Mrs. Badmus couldn't stop wondering how things could have gone so bad between this couple. She remembers that it was only about 3 years ago when they moved into the apartment as a newlywed couple. They were a young couple. Jide is about 35 years old and Funke is 10 years younger. Before they were married, Jide Kolawole was living in Paris and he relocated to Nigeria in 2014 to settle down with Funke, who was working as a principal state counsel at the Oyo State Ministry of Justice. Every time Mrs. Badmus saw the couple, they were always happy and cheerful. They would even come down to the apartment sometimes to visit and spend the evening talking over tea. What could have gone wrong? Mrs. Badmus is still lost in her thoughts when her husband, Mr. Badmus, pulls up to the driveway of the hospital. That night, Jide gets treated by a doctor on duty and they return home. Mr. Badmus and his wife then walk Jide and Funke to their flat upstairs just to be sure everything is fine before returning to their own apartment.
Please, take it easy. There is no need harming each other.
Everything can be sorted out amicably. We will talk in the morning. Just go to bed. And for tonight, please, leave the door unlocked.
The young couple agrees and they retire into their apartment. It's early in the morning the next day, 2nd of February 2016. Mrs. Badmus and her husband, Mr. Badmus, were fast asleep in their apartment. A loud bang wakes Mrs. Badmus. She jerks her head up, quickly opens her eyes, and looks around to see what caused the sound. It's from the apartment upstairs, and she could hear someone groaning. Mrs. Badmus turns to her husband lying beside her. He's still fast asleep. She shakes him awake.
I can hear a very loud sound. It's coming from up. And now I can hear someone groaning.
Mr. Badmus jumps from the bed and makes his way to the door. Mrs. Badmus follows right behind him. They both run up the stairs to Jide and Funke's flat. Mr. Badmus bangs for them to open the door, but remembers that it's unlocked from the night before, so he pushes it open. His eyes immediately fall on a body lying on the floor in a pool of blood, with one hand outstretched towards the door. Mr. Badmus raises his head and his eyes catch Funke standing a few steps away from the body and holding a knife in her hand.
Funke, what is this? What have you done?
Within the hour, Detective Kola Fashola arrives at the bank's estate. He had been alerted by the police operatives of the Oyo State Command that a murder had occurred there about an hour before. Detective Fashola walks past the medics on his way into the estate. They are on standby to move Jide's body after the criminal investigations team is done processing evidence from the scene. The other officers in the room take note of his presence and quickly step aside to give him a full view of the scene. One of the officers briefs him.
We have the deceased, Mr. Jide Kolawole, with a 5-year-old male, who was killed at about 5 a.m. this morning. And he was believed to have been stabbed by his wife, allegedly, a 25-year-old female, Mrs. Jide Kolawole. And we have witnesses outside, Mr. and Mrs. Badmus.
Madam, I would like to inform you that you are under arrest for the murder of your husband, Mr. Kolawole Jide, and we will be taking you down to the station for further processing. Ma'am, do you understand what I just said to you?
Funke stops rocking back and forth and nods.
It is your right to remain silent, as whatever you say or do might be used against you in the court of law.
As a practicing lawyer, she knows the process.
Oh.
Funke is led away in handcuffs to one of the police vans parked outside and they drive off to the police station. Later that morning, Funke was taken to the magistrate court in Yaganku, Ibadan, where she was remanded at Agodi prison. On On November 14, 2017, that's after spending 1 year and 9 months in Agodi prison, Funke was formally charged in the State High Court of Ibadan on 1 count of murder. She pleaded not guilty to that count, stating that she killed her husband in self-defense. According to her, that night when they got back home, they had another argument and Jide started to beat her. This time, when she reached over to her dressing table, she grabbed hold of a knife and used it to stab him several times. The fatal stab was to his neck. Even though Funke was not able to produce evidence of domestic abuse, she maintained that she did not mean to stab him and it was only in self-defense. In November 2017, the chief judge on the case found Funke not guilty of murder, saying that there was not enough evidence to prove that she intended to kill Jide.
It was a fight between a husband and a wife, which unfortunately resulted in a death. The public should not say Funke killed her husband as if it was a premeditated act.
But the judge did find her guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter and she was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. It's Wednesday morning, the 22nd of May 2019, and for the governor of Oyo State, Abiola Ajimobi, it's his last week in office. And as part of the end of his tenure, the governor looks at the list in front of him and skims down the names. At the very end of the list, prisoner number 50 is Funke Kolawole. The governor signs. Funke served a little over 3 years of her 7-year sentence for stabbing her husband to death. True Crime Naija is a Triple E Media production. Production copyright 2022, Triple E Media Productions. If you enjoyed this episode of True Crime Naija and would like to hear more, go to our website at 234audio.com to play the sample content, then download our app from the Google Play Store for even more episodes. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel at 234audio to watch the video for this episode. Make sure to click the notification bell, like and leave a comment. Our episodes can also be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment because it helps other people to find our content. This episode of True Crime Naija was written by Biyama Joseph and Ramat Mohammed. Produced by Antonietta Kalunta and Senet Ewa. Directed by Senet Ewa. Executive producer Ramat Mohammed. Jide Bolarinwa as Mr. Badmus. Amaka Agudegu as Mrs. Badmus. Jade Tululokpe Giwa as Funke Kolawole. Lighting, videography Uche Umba and Senet Ewa. Video editing Uche Umba. Sound editing Sam Tebakaji. Sound recording, mixing and mastering Dominic Tebakaji. Cover art by Mala Iwa Bado Ikaleku. Special thanks to Blanco, Asogwa Chima Collins, Simon Jr., Rabia Hadeja, Jeff Awotu, and Gilbert Owen. Stay alert, stay alive. See you next week.